Hello, hello. This chapter, learning, I just taught a course in this during the spring semester, and I did it online. So I stole a plethora of links that I shared with that class to share with you. They are not testable. They're just there to pique your interest, and hopefully you'll find them useful to look at. Watson is a big name here, and his work with the Childs, referred to often as Little Albert, in dealing with fear conditioning is infamous. You would never get this approved in the modern era. And he left academia shortly after this and just stopped dealing with this element of learning. But there are pictures, little Albert with a rad and other objects. And again, we would never be allowed to do this in the future. Learning. The book says acquisition of knowledge, skill, attitudes, or understanding is a result of experience. Yeah, I'll go with that. I'm going to give you my definition of learning, which I won't test you on, so don't go nuts. But in the course that I just taught, students had to memorize. Learning is a relatively is important, long-term change in behavior potentiality. There's a word I'm sure you've never used in a sentence, based upon experience. So it's the potential to behave. I know my phone number. I have the potential to tell you, but I choose not to. And stimuli are important. And often, yes, right, a sensory event. And habituation is a fundamental form of learning. If the same stimulus occurs over and over without having any serious consequences, you reduce your response to it. You habituate. And there's, in A, a real life example. In B, there's a research example, and I've given you a link that doesn't show habituation to a stimulus, but actually sensitization. And this research, by the way, not by this person, earned a Nobel Prize, which is a nice thing to have.
This sea snail, called a plesia, is somewhat of a celebrity, at least in the world of memory research. It was this lowly snail that revolutionized the...
Those puppies can be huge. I had a saltwater fish tank and I wanted to have one. And, a plesia is about the size of your thumb, would be $40 or so. In this video, you're
the way neurobiologists, like David Glanzman, think of memory. But how do you give a snail
look at that thing.
a memory?
Look at the size of that thing. Anyway, we can't control it that well. But yeah, that's it. It's 2 hands. That's a big animal. And as the animal gets bigger, the neurons in it get bigger. And this video is not very relevant to what's discussed in the textbook, but you get to see how neuroscience is done. And there you go. But a person who won the Nobel Prize in part for research on this spoke at the University of Scranton some years ago. And I got to introduce him when he gave his talk. And boy, he's bright, always wears a bow tie. And habituation, reversing habituation, sensitization. And this is relevant to the video, if an electric shock is administered to the animal, things that have been habituated dishabituate, and sensitization, that is in the video. A simple form of learning in which a strong aversive stimulus causes exaggerated responses. So these are, pretty fundamental. And there's a human example, and you're sensitized, and the aplesia, who's being stimulated with literally a water pick, like as in the product, at least in the original research. And then there's a shock to the tail, and sensitization occurs. Simple forms of learning are non-associative. Associative learning, we spend more time on classical conditioning, anticipation of the future, and there's Ivan Pavlov, who won the Nobel Prize for physiology or research, not for his research on classical conditioning, but for digestive physiology earlier. So in my other book, I would make you memorize things, and I won't. So we have unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, and if we have we probably have conditioned stimulus and conditioned response. Pavlov was an incredibly fastidious researcher. Allegedly, you had to walk on sand in his building so you didn't make sounds to upset his animals. There's the conditioned, and acquisition is the increase in response strength over trials. The eye blink, by the way, is very slow learning. Some learning is much faster. And in the next page, we have Santa. And by the way, people who know they're drinking Coke tend to prefer Coke, as was that discussed earlier in this chapter. But when they don't know what they're drinking, it's less true. Second order conditioning is very important. And we tend to not even realize that money is a conditioned reinforcer. People steal it, people die for it. But it has very little intrinsic reward properties. And there's stimulus generalization. You're trained at 1200 hertz or hertz, and as you are tested away from 1200 above or below it, your tendency to respond goes down. A lot of research on stimulus generalization. And spontaneous recovery is very important to us. And if you're going into clinical psychology, you really have to take uh, a course in learning. And we're now having a master's degree in, I think it's applied behavior analysis or something. That's applied learning theory too. So there's stimulus strength across trials. CS and US are paired, and then CS only, that's classic extinction. Response strength goes down, and then you pair them again and comes back up, usually faster, and you extinguish them, and they extinguish a little bit faster. But what's being demonstrated here is that if time passes, nothing goes on during time, you'll tend to respond again to the stimulus after the time, regardless of whether it's associated with the U.S. So spontaneous recovery is really important for therapy. And if you're trying to get over someone you love is a physical addiction, and extinction is part of getting over someone. But annoyingly, after a time period, sometimes your passion comes back for no good reason. Well, it's good reason because it's part of our evolutionary history to do that. Oh my God, John Garcia! I helped him move. He he was a hugely successful psychologist at UCLA. He got his start in psychology relatively late in life, very late in life, but he did research that pointed out the importance of evolutionary variables in learning, and he studied taste aversion, sometimes called poison avoidance. In part, this was funded by your federal government wanting to know about the effects of radiation exposure to our soldiers, because we thought we would have nuclear exchanges with tactical weapons where you'd be firing the atomic bomb across the valley at the enemy, and your people would get irradiated. And one effect of radiation is illness. This is classic research by Garcia. You have you have sound, you have light, you have taste. The shock grid is not accurately depicted. It should be bars. But what does the animal associate shock with? What does the animal associate light with? In our evolutionary history, sounds and lights virtually never led to physical illness, but tastes do. So the animal seems to be biased towards associating sights and sounds with the aversive effects of shock, and the taste with X-rays. Actually, this research was done later much more safely by giving injections of lithium chloride, which you may know about in relation to bipolar disorder. So very clever research, really, really clever research. John was a wonderful guy. He used to vacation on the East Coast, and he'd go to barn sales and stuff and get these really early tools for homemakers and stuff. And he had a room in his house where he'd have all these things, and he would, at one point in parties, he'd ask people into the room, and he'd make you try to figure out what the heck did early Americans do with this. Good question. And you probably have had an experience with taste aversion. I got taste aversion to Pringles early in my life. I had the flu, and my mom wanted to get me something I liked because I was nauseous. And I said, "Oh, there's this new thing, chips in a can. I want Pringles." And she bought me Pringles, and I had the flu, and I vomited, and I developed a many year aversion to Pringles. Some people get this from alcohol consumption. And there's a blue jay. I just took a picture of one of them in my yard this morning. And in real life there are toxic things, and there's the blue jay vomiting, and they that can be learned very quickly, and you tend to not eat those butterflies anymore. And some butterflies to pretend to be those butterflies by looking like them, in the hopes that animals have already learned to avoid them. And here's another simple form of learning with the Nobel Prize winner, Konrad Lorenz, who I was at UCLA when he died, and I read the New York Times report, or maybe it was the LA Times, sometimes, a report of his death, and I was shocked to find that he really liked Nazis. He wrote papers supporting their racist views, but there's a famous picture of him with ducklings that have been imprinted on him. And when I was a kid, my parents bought me a chick for Easter. Boy, is that a bad idea! And that chick imprinted on me, and it was just pitiful. You'd think you were killing it if you walked away from it. It's a very powerful learning paradigm. And there's the use of poison avoidance to reduce predation in some animals. And that has been found to be relatively valid use of, not relatively, it works. Biological constraints on learning, which basically means evolution. Fear conditioning, that was a field I was interested in, and there we are. Rats in a shock box. Again, the shock box, those should be grids. And you have a sound stimulus, and if nothing happens, not much of a heart rate or blood pressure change, and not much freezing. Rodents exhibit freezing when they're in a fearful situation, and there's not much of that. But if you've associated the sound with shock, your blood pressure goes way up, and the amount of freezing goes way up. And you don't need the shock after a while, classical conditioning. And there's a lab at UCLA that does a lot of research on freezing, and a graduate of the University of Scranton worked in that lab. Pretty exciting. And this kind of learning can be involved in learning about to be phobic of things. And again, this field of learning is really, really important to clinical psychology. Anything where you're dealing with phobias, fear, general fears, addictions, autism. When I first came back from UCLA, there was a now famous autistic treatment that was developed at UCLA. I used to ride the elevator with the guy. And when I hit town, there was a little news article about me, and a desperate parent contacted me almost immediately about this method of treating autism. And that, I'm not that kind of psychologist, but it can help. It can help a great deal. And reinforcement. This is big, and lots of things to learn in here. Thorndike was an early researcher on this. I can't imagine doing research on cats, but he did. And there's a puzzle box, and the animal has to learn how to trip the lock to let that door open, which gives them two good things. They get to leave the box, and they get a snack. And there's an example of how much time it takes to get out of the box across time. And the animal tries lots of weird things at first, and then eventually usually fixates on what works, and out you go. So that was early scientific learning research. And he talked about the law of effect. And then we come upon behaviorism and Watson. Watson was a revolutionary. There were all these theories in psychology when Watson came along, and he said, "Forget the theories, forget it. Black box. We don't want to know what's going on in the brain. That's too confusing. Let's just deal with the environment and learning, and learn the laws of learning." Radical behaviorism, which can lead to belief in a tabula rasa child, where you can take any child and do anything with it. And if you don't believe that people can believe that, there's the famous quote by Watson in 1924, "Give me a dozen healthy infants." And of course, he loved doing research on infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to make anyone of them at random, to take anyone at random and train them to become any type of specialist I might select: doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, yes, even beggar man and thief, regardless of talents, pensions, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. Geez, that's blank slate. Not very realistic, I don't believe, but blank slate. And I don't think anyone thinks this way anymore. Political liberals are often said to think this way, and there's some truth to that, but not total truth. And here's our good friend B.F. Skinner. He wrote well early in his career, no doubt about it. And I've given you several links for him. He lived in Scranton for a little while. And there's his house. It's a very nice house. It's across the street from a house where the current governor of Pennsylvania grew up, and it's about 3 blocks away from where Joe Biden grew up, and 3.5 blocks away from where I grew up. So the Greenbridge section of Scranton, pretty magical place. There's some money in the Greenridge area of Scranton. This is a few blocks away from the house I just showed you. I don't know if it's sold yet, but I remember, driving by this house through most of my life, and oh my God, that is a house. So there was some serious money in Scranton, and serious money in Greenridge. Skinner's brother dropped dead, basically, I think, playing basketball while I was in high school. And there was his grave in the Dunmore Cemetery, 1906. And sad story, but true. Well, all right. We've already passed over Pavlov, but this is a sketch of his research equipment. And see these little black things down here? Those are like little accordions. So when a drop of saliva would come down, it would hit this paddle, and there's a pivot point here. And when it drops there, the paddle would shake. It would compress the air. The air would expand over here, and then you get a tracing on that recording device, which, by the way, would not have been black on white. It would have been white on black, as I'll show you in a second. He used a chimograph. Oh, geez. That's quite a. And there's a chimograph. And down here, you'd have a clock motor that would make the thing rotate. There'd be a piece of paper. It would be black because you had to hold it over a kerosene lamp that was misadjusted to get soot all over it. And these recording pens were simply thin wires with virtually no mass. You couldn't put ink in there. It would increase the mass too much. So this was really delicate. And it would scratch off the soot. And at the end of your recording, you had to take it off and go to the lacquer table and paint it with lacquer to make it immortal. So a lot of early physiology was done using a chimograph. Skinner, I'm sure, was exposed to that, which led him to invent this puppy. And that's a cumulative recorder. And this is an aluminum disc with paper stretched over it. And here is a clip. It's really a fuse clip that would hold an ink pen. And as the animal responded, this pen would be dragged up the paper. And notice there's a coil of wire here. And often when the animal got a reinforcement, it would create a pip, which the book will show you in a bit. And then once it got to the top, there was a little switch, and it would get sucked to the bottom, and you'd go again. The roll of paper that feeds this is down the bottom. Functionally, it's infinite in length. I spent many happy hours with cumulative recorders. And here's one in action. I hope there's no ads.
Grammarly can help you write quickly and confidently, so you never have to slow down at work. Stay on top of emails, documents.
Okay, so there's the clip, and the paper is being moved by a clock motor, so you get a flat like here where there's no behavior, you just get a flat line. And every time the animal responds, the chain drags this unit up, and whenever there's a reinforcement, you get a slash. So you're gonna see a number of those recordings later. You can hear that this is being done in an open room. When I was you, we all had to train rats. We all got our own rat. And the book has a good picture of a cumulative recorder and operant chamber, but here's another one. Oh, there's Skinner and his wife and their daughter. That's from a piece he wrote called Baby in a Box. It was an air crib. And boy, I wanted to build one of those for my daughter, but my wife wouldn't hear of it. Oh, by the way, I kept saying that the shock boxes were not well represented. See, there are bars here. And there's a little pellet dispenser and lights and sounds and levers. You can do a bunch of stuff. Ooh, I almost closed. No, that is the right thing to close. Almost done. these two links reinforce what's in the book. I'll skip them now. Skinner was around for World War II, and he was involved in the war effort. And what he was designing was guided bombs. Here's a guided bomb. So there would be 3 pigeons in here. Each of them would have their own screen. And on the screen was a target, often a ship. And the pigeon was trained to peck at where the ship was. There are 3 pigeons because if one is having a bad day, the technology ignored it. And the other 2 pigeons got to vote on where the bomb would go. And as they picked in different sections of the screen, there were fins on the bomb, and the bomb would direct toward the target. There's a famous picture. And here's how the pigeon was hooked up. There's a little thing on their head, and when they looked, left, right, up or down, this wire would hit these connectors, and the bomb would change direction. It was never used. The war ended before that got to be used. Russians did things with dogs. Pretty cruel and unusual, but dogs were trained to run under tanks, and then surprise, today you're wearing a bomb and you and the tank will blow up. These Batfire bombs, they were actually being shipped to be used in Japan when the atomic bombs were unleashed and the war ended. They were really close to being used. They were going to be dropped, and pigeons like to roost under eaves. Japanese homes were often made of wood, and they would go in under the eaves and then burst into flame and burn things up. And dolphin and sea lions in the Navy, we don't do anything evil to them. This is a really, really good talk. And you probably don't follow me on Facebook, but a rat that was involved in this research just retired. And boy, rats in Africa are pretty good size. So that guy reminds me of Spock for some reason. Commercial.
I'm here today to share with you an extraordinary journey, extraordinary rewarding journey, actually.
Anyway, so trust me, he taught rats to find
In the house, and I learned about their
look at the
stories.
size
So
of that rat. And
different backgrounds,
he trained them.
dependency on imported know-how, goods, services, exuberant cultural diversity. Africa was truly fascinating for me. I became an industrial engineer, engineering product development, and I focused on appropriate detection technologies.
So if you're interested, you can look at that. He also trained the rats to sniff out tuberculosis, which is pretty important. COVID sniffing dogs have been in the news. This is a cancer sniffing dog. So and there's a picture of a cumulative recorder with resets, and there's the pen, and there's a second pen and little slash marks. So these are just supplements, nothing new tested here, just for your viewing enjoyment. Why is there a delay? And when I was in grad school, my department was very behavioristic, very influenced by Skinner. I took classes where we took one Skinner book and analyzed it for the entire semester. And I've done operant conditioning, and there's a modern box there. And again, notice the shock grids are bars. And there were people who taught chickens to play ping pong and stuff. And they actually made some important discoveries that related to evolution. Other than that, that's sort of a cute story. Olds and Milner, they're very famous. Reward systems in the brain. And shaping is important. There's the shaping of raising your hand. The chair of our department taught us all history and literature, and we found something in the classroom that he liked, and we used that stimulus to shape him. By the end of the semester, he was giving lectures with his foot up on a garbage can. Shaping works. And acquisition, extinction, superstitious behavior. You see so much of this, particularly in athletes. And then the 4 kinds, a 2x2 table, positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment is the way I like to refer to them. And there's the 2x2 table. Increase in behavior, contingent upon behavior, the stimulus is added. Decrease in behavior, contingent on behavior, the stimulus is removed. Negative reinforcement, contingent upon behavior, and reverse the stimulus is removed. And then positive punishment, contingent upon behavior, a stimulus is added. Timeout. The person who invented that just died. Less well-informed parents just hit their children, and that typically does not work well. Punishment can be counterproductive. There's no doubt about it. Many civilized countries don't allow their educational systems to beat their children. I think our culture still does. The avoidance, the escape conditioning, the stimulus is on. You're being shocked, or the hawk is over your head, and you run and it goes away. Avoidance, you feel as if something bad is about to happen, and you engage in a behavior to make that threat go away. And there's attributed to Pavlov. And the grid is correct here. So the animal has to learn to shuttle back and forth. And once they've learned this, it's very difficult to extinguish them because they keep going. You have to sort of force them to experience that the shock doesn't occur. Passive avoidance related to freezing, you stay still. And some important research has been done there. Learned helplessness is huge. It's thought to be related to depression in humans, and it was originally done with dogs, and more recently with rats. The animals can be exposed to the same number of shocks, but one animal, when they press a lever or spin a wheel, the shock goes off. It goes off for both of them. So the 2 animals get exactly the same amount of shock, but one animal is in charge of it, and the other animal often learns to be helpless and not even try to escape when they're given a chance to escape later. So if you get a reinforcement every time you hit a lever, that's a continuous reinforcement schedule. I have a story for Skinner and partial reinforcement schedules. I thought I gave you a picture of that. Pill rolling machine. So when Skinner was doing his early research, you couldn't go to the store and order rat pellets because he was the only one on Earth using them. So what he had to do, this is a pill making machine. I think I've seen one of these in a pharmacy in downtown Scranton. You make a paste of what you want to make pills of, and you slather the paste on here, sort of like peanut butter, and then you put this on top, and the indentations match up, and you move it back and forth, and a miracle happens. The paste turns into little balls, and you knock the little balls out, and you put them on wax paper, and you make more balls and more balls, and a couple hours later, you have a lot of balls. Skinner, as he told the story, was sitting at Harvard on Saturday afternoon, and he wanted to go out. He wanted to go outside and play. And using simple arithmetic, he discovered that at the rate the animals were eating his pellets, he'd run out Monday morning unless he started making pellets right away. And then he had the brilliant idea: why do I need to give them a pellet every time? And he invented the partial reinforcement schedule, which unfortunately, if I were writing this chapter, I would have put in there first. It's a fixed interval, but here we have fixed ratio. Now, fixed ratio, if the ratio is 1, then that's continuous reinforcement. But you could do a 2 or a 3 or a 4. And fixed ratios are used quite a bit in research, sometimes to decide how much animals like drugs. Variable ratio is very relevant. It's the foundation of gambling and hunting and looking for dates and lots of important human behaviors. So you could have an FR5 where every fifth response a pellet is delivered, or a VR5 where you could get a pellet 2 times in a row, or you have to wait 10, and it's variable, and that's the term variable ratio. So there's an FR up on top. And notice that the animal here is exhibiting a little pause after the reinforcement. Those post-reinforcement pauses indicating a little bit of ratio strain. A friend of mine did research with pigeons where he put his pigeons on FR schedules until they were pausing, and then he gave them a target pigeon to keep them company in the back of their cages. And during those pauses, those pigeons would turn around and peck the heck out of the target bird. It's not an indication of happiness. And no doubt when you study, you engage in partial reinforcement pauses. That's an indication of ratio strain. And there's a variable ratio. Notice it's nice and smooth. And I like it that it's steeper. The next one is FI. And the first schedule invented by Skinner was an FI 1 minute. And why was it 1 minute? Because he went into a shop and found a timer, and it was a 1 minute timer. And he was off to the races. Notice the scalloped pattern there. After the pellet is delivered, no responding. And then as time passes, the animal checks it out. And then right before the next pellet, often the rate is quite high. And then there's variable interval. So you can have an FI 1 minute, you can have a VI 1 minute. Notice that the variable interval, there's no real pattern. It's steady and medium response rate. People who do research in operant psychology often use that schedule because it's very stable. The behavior is stable. And there's talking and talking. By the way, when I was you and was graduating, I wanted to do research on variable ratios. And I had to leave before the research was done because the animals just kept going faster and faster. Variable ratios are weird. They're kind of addicting in and of themselves, which is why society should worry about gambling. And there's a nice graph. There's primary reinforcer and secondary reinforcer. And the book points out that money is a very powerful secondary reinforcer. And there's a summary and some review questions. And observational learning is nice. It has a long history, and research is still being done on it. And there's some classic research by Tolman, and he had the concept of a cognitive map. This is the kind of thing that Watson and Skinner didn't like thinking about because it was, you were trying to go inside the black box. But the data are true. The animal did learn something. It formed a map of things, apparently. Right. So at the height of behaviorism, they did not like the cognitive map, although there was a battle between cognitive psychology and behaviorism, and cognitive one. So modern learning theory involves cognitive and behaviorism. So here's another maze piece of research, and the animal goes in there and has no reason to learn anything, but apparently they do. And the blue line is the key line. So yeah, they're just kind of wandering around in there. They make a lot of errors because, in a sense, there's no right direction. But then food is placed in the maze, and bam, they show they've learned something from their wanderings. So play and just letting your mind wander is important. And he tells a cute story about him and his dog, now dead Dipsy, learning from another dog. And Japanese macaques, the ones you've seen sitting in hot tubs with snow on their hair. Very interesting story there about one smart macaque learning to clean off the sweet potatoes and then kind of liking the taste of the salt water and dipping, and other macaques learning from her demonstration. Well, I remember this where the people in England were getting upset because people they would get their milk delivered to their front step, and somebody would break into it. Well, they found out who was breaking into it. It was the blue tit, and yeah, that didn't work out well for the milk company. By the way, Mark Breedlove, when he was at UCLA, the lab he was in primarily did research on birdsong. They used zebra finches, and this is sort of related. He went to Berkeley after UCLA. He doesn't do this research, but Peter Marler is a very, very famous researcher on song learning in birds, and autism funding often finds its way into these labs because the importance of learning languages in children, and the parallels with birds is hard to overstate. Bolo dolls. This is famous, and it's potentially disturbing, and very important research by Bandura. And you may not have seen a literal Bolo doll, but you've seen something like it. And if the models aggressive behavior toward the Bolo doll, the child will emulate it. If the adult is later punished, particularly females are sensitive to that. The males are still pretty aggressive. And that's classic important psychological research. Insight. You can tell this is old. Curler, I think, was sort of trapped because of World War I, and he had these chimps that he could study, and he studied insight learning and how the animals could suddenly kind of piece together how to put things in their environment together and get to target bananas. And this is classic human research on creativity. You are given those objects on the table and told you have to build something to hold the candle up on the bulletin board. And when was that? This is before my time. But I think I remember being confronted by this task by older students when I was an undergraduate. And whatever happened to little Albert, this is not a pretty story. So you can look at that. Why are we so smart? This is interesting. Astrocytes, which I don't think were discussed very much in the neuroscience chapter. They're an important type of glia, and they don't just sit there. They're important, and they were able to introduce human astrocytes into mice brains, and the mice got smarter. And this may be the end. And that's the end. So in a sense, I apologize for all these extra links I gave you, but I know this stuff. And I just taught a course in it, and I had all these links. So I subjected you to them. So thanks for your patience. I hope you've enjoyed this. Learning is really, really important. Addiction, love, autism, training pets, training children. It's very, very important. I'm not trying to market for my own class, but it's important.